Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Tuesday edition here of Point of View, and in the next hour, we're going to have Nick Adams in studio, so it'll be great to chat with him. Carter Page will be with us at 2 o'clock, but I thought this hour we could look at some issues in the news. And since a very significant number of you that listen to this broadcast actually live in Texas, I thought I would start out with a Texas story, which actually is a story out of Collin County, which, if you live in the Texas area, you know very well. It's kind of north. It's the county north of Dallas County. And it has to do with an individual that I've known for a number of years, and that is the Collin County Judge, Chris Hill. I've been following the story, but now Aaron Anderson, no relation, actually has done a very good story that sums all of this up. And if you are paying attention to the pandemic and the coronavirus numbers and even the COVID deaths, I'm going to come back to an issue that I mentioned yesterday, but we then had people call my producer, Steve, saying he's got to start with this story. Well, okay, I'm going to maybe make it the second story, and we'll have to mention it again for the National Hour. But before we get to that, it's a reminder of the fact that when we see these numbers, we've known that some of the numbers aren't accurate. We recognize that there could be overcounts of the number of people that actually have the coronavirus, and it could be an undercount because some people are asymptomatic. There could be an undercount because some people die and we never tested them. There could be an overcount because, as we pointed out before, some people that die and then are tested. And my great illustration is this individual who was killed in a motorcycle accident, but then later tested for COVID and found out he was positive, so he died of COVID, even though he died in a motorcycle crash. So you recognize that sometimes the numbers aren't too good. Well, those have been kind of the arguments on the periphery. But then when you have an elected official, Collin County Judge Chris Hill, who says, these numbers are not accurate, I know these numbers are not accurate, and then even post on their website that these numbers are probably not accurate, you know you started to get through to some individuals. Now, you can see this on a number of places. You can see it on the Collin County website, but on Facebook, the county judge, Chris Hill, posted, the nonsense continues for another day. There seems to be no rhyme nor reason or logic to the numbers that keep coming out of DSHS. This is Department of State Health Services, because he has said he has really no confidence in the accuracy of the data for the pandemic that is used basically to set public policy in Texas, even after they did what's called a fix to try to clarify some of the active numbers. Let me give you some of the background history on this. He's been raising questions for some time about the data reporting since the Texas Department of State Health Services took over tracking and reporting the coronavirus cases, for example, Collin County and many of the others. And so after the judge, Chris Hill, and the commissioner's court called out the state's bad data and basically pushed the agency to fix its, quote, significantly overstated active case counts. Are you ready for these numbers? Matter of fact, you might get a pen and write these down, because this will show you everything. The Department of State Health Services revised Collin County's active COVID-19 case count on Wednesday from 4,736. So write down 4,736 to, what's the number? 81. from 4,700 to 81. Okay, that should tell you everything right there. So this is why he has been so frustrated, because what happens is somebody goes on a case count and then they are cured, or they recover, I guess is the better term. Nobody's, I guess, technically cured, but in that sense. But they recover and they stay on the list. It reminds me a little bit of the membership rolls of some of these churches. You go into these churches and everybody gets on the list, but nobody gets off the list. And they'll say, we have 10,000 people at this church. And you're looking around and saying, I saw about 100 people in the sanctuary. What? But that's how bad this has become from the Texas Department of State Health Services. So, nevertheless, they revised them down from 4,700 to 81. Okay, so there we are. Well, then he also then said that he is pretty much 100% certain that the data provided by the Department of State Health Services and the Texas Health Trace tracking system was not accurate as well, because, as he pointed out, we're necessarily removing all those of recovery. And so then he says the numbers were so off that he actually posted on the county's website a warning that says, because we have been aware of inaccuracies in the DSHS reporting, the county has no confidence in the data currently being provided to us. Now, I do not know how many of you watch the news every night at, say, 10 o'clock, but I've noticed something else. I tend to watch sometimes Channel 4 at 9 o'clock, sometimes Channel 10 at 10 o'clock, just to kind of see the difference in coverage and things like that. And I've been struck by the number of times that they'll put up the Dallas County and Tarrant County numbers, but they lately haven't been putting up the Collin County or even the Denton County numbers. And that's because a lot of people are making a big fuss about the fact that we don't think those numbers are accurate. And so, as a result, they have the disclaimer on the website. Okay, one more thing. What Chris Hill, he's not through, who again is the judge of Collin County, said is, we continue to discuss the situation daily with DSHS officials who continue to tell us they're working on it. But for now, I remain convinced that the Department of Health Services has no idea how many cases actually exist in Collin County. And then ask the other question, do they really know how many COVID-19 cases there are in the rest of the state? So if up until now you've been saying, well, I don't live in Collin County, so why do I care? If they're that off in Collin County, what do you think the possibility is that in Travis County, Harris County, for that matter, Dallas County, Tarrant County, Denton County, those might be off as well? So I'm not trying to pick on, I'm sure, very good qualified individuals that are at the Department of State Health Services or even at the Texas Health Trace Tracking Services, but don't you think maybe we've got to reevaluate some of the numbers? After the break, I will come back and go into more detail, but if you haven't heard it said, almost everybody now is talking about the fact that this latest report that came from the Centers for Disease Control, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, if you look at their chart, and again, it's a very easy chart, I think it's chart 4, you can see that 94% of the people that died of COVID-19 died because of what are called comorbidities, and I'll go into the detail about that in just a minute, which means that only 6% died just from COVID-19. Now, I said that yesterday, but I guess I didn't say it enough, so I said it in this segment. I'm going to come back and explain it in the next segment. Then we go on the national hour when I finally get, I guess I got, Steve's giving me half an hour at 2:30. I'll say it again because it's out there, and I think we mentioned it, but maybe we didn't mention it enough, and it is pretty striking, and so we'll go into a little more of the detail. I'll break that out after the break. And then we'll move on from the pandemic, because after all, Joe Biden made some statements about the violence in our cities, and we've got to talk about that. And we also know how little we actually saw in some of the networks on the Republican convention, so we'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, dementia is typically a disease that affects the elderly, but doctors are starting to talk about a new type of cognitive condition affecting younger individuals. They call it digital dementia. It results, they say, from the overuse of digital technology such as smartphones and computers. Brain function deteriorates because of digital overuse. Now, the left side of the brain is generally associated with rational thought, numbers, and facts. The right side is responsible for creative skills and emotional thought. If the right side is underdeveloped over a long period of time, dementia develops. The phenomenon of digital dementia was first noticed in South Korea. That should not be surprising, since that country has such a large population of internet users. It is also one of the most digital nations in the world, and a place where internet addiction was identified as far back as the late 1990s. They found that heavy users of digital technology are more likely to develop the left side of their brains. This leaves the right side untapped and underdeveloped. This affects attention and memory span, which could also lead to early onset of dementia in a percentage of cases. They also found that children were more at risk than adults because their brains actually were still developing. The Korean findings come after a study that was done at UCLA that found that young people were increasingly suffering from memory problems. A percentage of young men and women complained that their memory was poor. These initial studies are one more reason why parents need to monitor the digital world of their children. Digital dementia is just one of many reasons we need to protect children from the digital media storm. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, one of the articles I posted here, in case you say, well, I'd like to see this for myself. I certainly encourage you to do that. Don't believe anything we say around here unless you check it out, and you can check it out. One of the articles there is posted. It says 94% of COVID deaths had contributing causes, according to new CDC report. This is just one article that was in Red State yesterday. I read one from Town Hall. There are a lot of them out there, but let me just use this one because according to this new report, and again, it's from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, a whopping 94% of the deaths that had coronavirus listed as the cause of death actually had something else that actually brought the death about. Now, that's what Brandon Morris says. I would have to maybe modify that slightly and say it is quite possible that both their issue of influenza, pneumonia, respiratory failure, cardiac arrest, whatever, may have been brought on by COVID. So I think sometimes people make a statement that goes a little bit further, and so I'm a little uneasy with the way Brandon Morris put it that way, that something else caused their death. No, I think the two work synergistically, can I use that word, together, and may have, but certainly it leaves, to everybody's concern, only 6% of those individuals who died simply because of the COVID-19 virus.
Now, part of this has to do with the way it is recorded. You know, if you have COVID-19 and then you develop pneumonia, well, did pneumonia kill you or did COVID-19? Well, you didn't have COVID. Well, you didn't have the pandemic. Maybe that's the case. So it isn't as clear as everybody's trying to make it out, but it is, I think, a great illustration that these individuals that have died oftentimes have what are called comorbidities. And again, Brandon Morris in this article that we've posted say, as you can see, the vast majority of them, if you look at the table, and he's posted the table. Now, the table's a little small, so you need a magnifying glass, or you can simply go to CDC and find it there. And when you go there, you can see the table. Last time, this one doesn't have the number on it, but I think yesterday I mentioned it was table 4, but it's not hard to find, and the report is very easy. Matter of fact, there is a natural link, by the way, on this article we've posted, so you can see it for yourself. You know, don't trust me. Don't take the extrapolated application that some people are using. Just read it. And what you'll find is that the vast majority of these individuals that died, and it's a sad commentary because we are talking about, you know, what was the number? Again, I need a magnifying glass, 161,392. I guess my ophthalmologist will be glad that I can still read it without glasses. But nevertheless, it says the vast majority of those had other lung-related ailments associated with the deaths, with other factors such as hypertension, heart failure, and other circulatory diseases. A lot of these, of course, were respiratory diseases. And if you look at the chart, you'll see a very long list of first respiratory diseases, then a fairly long list of circulatory diseases. And then it adds other factors. For example, Alzheimer's, diabetes, obesity, and a number of others. And so those other factors are pretty significant because that accounts, there are nearly, what it says, 78,000 deaths described to all other conditions and causes. And so as a result, what you see is that the CDC noted where the deaths took place. And that's significant. But again, recognize that may not always tell you everything, because if somebody has the pandemic, has the virus, has COVID-19, and then is transferred to the hospital, well, they died in the hospital. But nevertheless, you see that in healthcare settings or hospital, 105,000. And then in the second largest number, nursing homes. And if you've listened to this program any length of time, we've pointed out that a disproportionate number of deaths in nursing homes are what account for so many of these nationwide deaths. And if you actually look at the states that have the highest per capita death rate, New Jersey is first, New York is second. Off the top of my head, I believe that it is Massachusetts and Connecticut. I may have left one out there. But nevertheless, let's just take New York and New Jersey. A lot of those were in nursing homes. And so you can see that that accounts for it. And even as we talked about this on Friday with Dr. Miro Matthews, because he had posted this piece on would a Democrat president have done a better job dealing with the pandemic than Donald Trump? Because that's the argument being made right now by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And he points out that one of the arguments is, well, we have so many more deaths in America. Yes, but we have so many more people in America. If you look at how deaths per 100,000 break down, or per capita, however you want to look at it, we're 8th on the list. And that 8th on the list is due in large part that the top 5 per capita deaths actually are all in the Northeast, all in situations where you have Democrat governors who actually may have done some things, especially in the case of the governor of New York, that may have actually led to more deaths, like putting people that tested positive for COVID-19 in nursing homes and things like that. So nevertheless, this is just a quick summary. Maybe I took longer than I needed to. 94% of the deaths had some contributing cause, what we call comorbidities. Only 6% actually died of COVID-19, and that has caused quite a stir among a number of individuals. But just before we take a break, let me just at least get to the campaign, and that is the former Vice President Joe Biden originally said, I'm just going to stay in my basement. We can run a campaign from here. No big deal. Nope, that's not going to happen. All of a sudden, the polls go the other direction, and Joe Biden went to Pennsylvania and also a couple of other places. And so, as this particular article points out, and we've posted it on our website, Scary says, after 3 months of violence, vandalism, and arson in our biggest cities, it was, again, excused in many cases by those or even ignored by some of the people in the Democratic Party. Now there has been a decision to actually make some statements. And so yesterday, you, of course, had the former vice president actually make some statements, or even on Sunday posted on his campaign site that some of this is unacceptable. But nevertheless, it was not necessarily the kind of statement that people maybe wanted to see. And I'll come back to how, in some respects, the mainstream press wanted to even kind of cover for the vice president, who has been almost silent about this. As you well know, you had 4 days of the Democratic National Convention, and nobody said much of anything. Now, the argument could be made on the other side, well, we didn't need to say much about it because people know where we stand. Well, let's at least look at 2 statements by leading Democrats that, if anything, seem to encourage some of that. I'll go first of all to the representative from Massachusetts, Ayanna Pressley, a Democrat, who said in an interview on MSNBC, and has been replayed many times before, there needs to be unrest in the streets. In other words, I am not only not against the unrest in the streets, we need more unrest in the streets to bring about the kind of transformation we need. Let's go to someone else. You may say, well, I don't know Representative Pressley that well, although she's part of the squad. I think most of you would know who the Speaker of the House is. That would be Nancy Pelosi. And interestingly enough, Nancy Pelosi had said that she was surprised why there weren't uprisings all over the country over Trump's policies. Okay, well, those were the statements already out there. If you don't correct them or you don't modify them, what's the implication? Well, the implication is that we're quite content with what's taking place there. And so as a result, sometimes the media has done a good job of even trying to downplay those. And I mentioned just yesterday, and you probably have seen the picture, I even used it when I spoke at a conference by Zoom on Saturday, in which in front of a burning building in Kenosha, Wisconsin, you have a CNN correspondent, Omar Jimenez, who actually, why he is talking about the fact that the riots were fiery but mostly peaceful. Yes, they're pretty fiery because there's a building on fire behind you. And then I mentioned the other one where a producer at CNN actually had posted that these were violent protests. And then within about 2 minutes, you could see that they changed the chyron and took out the word violent. So when we come back from the break, there was an attempt yesterday by a Washington Post writer, who is certainly free to do that, to try to defend Joe Biden. And I thought maybe if nothing else, since some people have said that Joe Biden has made statements that are too little too late, let's go back and look at the last time Joe Biden did make any kind of statement about the riots, and then the excuse given for why there was then a silence that took place almost 3 months before he spoke out again. It's a fair question. And after all, these are the kinds of questions that should be asked by the mainstream media, but seemingly get ignored so often. So we'll talk about that real briefly. And then one of the other articles I've posted is the argument has been made that certainly Donald Trump has been trying to reach out to the African-American voter. And we talked about that yesterday on our third hour. Well, has that helped? We now have a survey to give us some ideas about whether that's working or failing. And we'll talk about that right after this.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
If you thought the 2020 presidential election was going to be contentious, then you would certainly be right. And a good illustration of that comes from Philip Wegman. He wrote a piece called "It's Trump versus Biden in the Age of Mob Politics." And I'm just going to use this primarily just to give you the quotes, because yesterday when the former vice president, Joe Biden, spoke, he said, "Look, you know me, you know my heart, you know my story, my family story. Ask yourself, do I look like a radical socialist with a soft spot for rioters? Really? Come on, man." I was waiting for him to say, he didn't say that. "I want a safe America, safe from COVID, safe from crime and looting, safe from racially motivated violence, safe from bad cops. Let me be crystal clear, safe from 4 more years of Donald Trump." And so then went on to even say, look, if you want more of this, just re-elect Donald Trump. That sounded a little bit like a warning or a threat, but nevertheless, it did not go unnoticed by Donald Trump. Now, it's kind of interesting because Philip Wegman then gives you the quote from Donald Trump and refers to him as the old New York real estate tycoon. Philip, he is the president. I mean, I think I know why you're doing this, because what President Trump said was, Biden is using mafia talking points. The mob will leave you alone if you give them what they want. And so I guess maybe that's why he talked about the fact that he's a former New York tycoon. The mob will leave you alone, but it does not work that way. Once you give in to them, they keep taking. What happens is you give and give, they no longer respect you. And the president told reporters that's what happened with the Democrats. And, of course, you might remember in his speech, President Trump even went on to say that they will make every city look like Democrat-run Portland, Oregon. No one will be safe in Biden's America. So both of these candidates now are saying, if you don't elect me, it's going to get worse. You won't be safe in Biden's America. Biden's saying, oh, come on, if nothing else, if you want more of these riots, they're going to take place. But a lot of it was simply because he was saying, look at me. Do I look like a radical socialist? Actually, you don't. But if I look at your platform and the individuals that are probably going to be implementing it, yes, probably so. Are you a socialist? No. I mean, you've been more of a moderate centrist type of Democrat on many issues, but I'm not even sure what you believe anymore or what kind of memory you have or how active you're going to be in your presidency if you are elected. So that's the first thing. And, do I look like I have a soft spot for rioters? Well, this was the attempt yesterday to do what could be possibly done to address this issue, because it's a fairly long silence. Derek Hunter quotes one individual, a writer for the Washington Post, Dave Weigel, who was just trying to argue that, look, if you go back to June 2nd, Joe Biden did condemn the violence and looting in Minnesota. But then I love what Derek Hunter says. Okay, June 2nd. Okay, and it's September 1st. That's 3 months ago. During that interim, has anything else happened? More rioting, looting, violence, of course, and no real comments made about Seattle, which was being destroyed, Portland, which was being burned, all the looting and violence in Chicago, St. Louis, Denver, San Diego, Los Angeles, New York, Washington, D.C., Kenosha. And basically his argument is met with silence. And then, of course, Democratic National Convention, you had more people watch the Democratic National Convention than watch the Republican National Convention. Perfect opportunity to speak to that issue. 4 days, as Derek Hunter says, of glowing coverage, and dozens of speakers free to sound off on just about anything. And no real comments. And then it goes through the long list of individuals that were even shot or killed during that period of time. But nevertheless, that is the case. And so never once, he says, did Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, or any Democrat of note mention anybody, because at one point they did talk about some people that were killed, but they didn't mention Black Lives Matter. They didn't mention Antifa. They didn't mention a lot of other things. And the argument that Derek Hunter makes is, when the media has been doing a pretty good job of whitewashing all this or simply ignoring it, it emboldens you. And he points out that history has shown that it's very easy to rile up a mob. It's almost impossible to control it once it gets going. This is one of the reasons why more and more people are saying, Donald Trump, just tell your supporters, stay out of these hot spots, because what happened in Portland will happen again. And so if you want to get a perspective on how individuals stand on these issues, this article also reminds us, and Tucker Carlson mentioned last night, I'd forgotten about this, Senator Kamala Harris actively raised money, bail money, for those individuals that were actually the rioters. And I'd forgotten about some of that. And so because of her, and now there's more than a dozen identified staff members, campaign staff members, who also donated to that, then you, of course, have cash bail. By the way, I won't get into that right now because that's kind of a criminal justice argument, but it is kind of intriguing to me that one of the issues being raised right now is whether to get rid of cash bail, and that's part of the Democratic National Platform and something that Joe Biden has talked about briefly, but Bernie Sanders talked about quite a bit just the other day in an interview, which was kind of striking to me as well. But just before we take a break, let's talk about the polls. Again, I'll issue my standard disclaimer. The only poll that really matters happens November 3rd. But some of these polls are more accurate than others, and one that just came out recently is what is known as the Emerson poll. The Emerson poll is done by Emerson College. It usually is fairly accurate. This one actually surveyed 1,500 voters between August 30th and 31st, so last 2 days. And they wanted to basically just try to estimate what has been the impact of the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention. And what, of course, many have seen is the race has tightened. In their particular case, they argue now that the vice president is ahead by 2 percentage points. I talked yesterday about a poll that had the president ahead by 3 percentage points, but some of these are kind of within the margin of error, and it depends on how the question is asked and when the question was asked. But the point I want to make before we take a break is this. One of the more surprising results, and this comes from this article that actually appeared by Harris Aulick, that one of the more surprising results from the poll was the president's increase among black voters. The poll found that Biden garnered about 77% support from the demographic compared to the 19% for the incumbent. But again, let me put that in perspective. Almost 90% of African Americans usually vote for the Democratic candidate. 93% voted for Barack Obama. It was a drop down to only 88% that voted for Hillary Clinton. And so in the last election, 88% voted for Hillary Clinton, about 8%, and I'm just rounding the numbers off, for Donald Trump. Well, if you go from 8% to 19%, I can tell you who wins the presidency. I can tell you that because especially if those are numbers in key battleground states, we know exactly it was, in many cases, the African-American vote in Pennsylvania that actually gave Donald Trump Pennsylvania and the electoral votes and the presidency. So let's look at that in a little more detail. Again, just because 19% actually support the president doesn't mean that 19% of African Americans would vote for the president. So let's not overestimate that at all. But it's, again, a really interesting and intriguing point that since Barack Obama, Democratic candidates have garnered a slower and lower percentage of the black vote. Now, it hasn't been huge, but from 93% for Barack Obama to 88% for Hillary Clinton was significant. And interestingly enough, what is so interesting is if you look at 3 states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, the ones we oftentimes talk about, that narrowly went for Trump, then you can begin to see that the data from the Michigan Secretary of State's office indicates that Clinton received 75,000 fewer votes, for example, in Wayne County, where Detroit is located, than Obama did in 2012. Even though Clinton won the county by a margin, the decrease in support ensured Clinton lost the state to Trump. And again, a very significant change, which was actually supposed to just try to measure whether there was a post-election bounce, which seemed to take place after the Republican National Convention, did not seem to have taken place after the Democratic National Convention. But one of the most striking parts of these numbers is you might remember that we had Robert Woodson on the other day in which he was making this prediction that no longer would we expect Donald Trump to get 8% of the African-American vote. He'd get anywhere from 16 to 19% of the vote. It's almost like he was looking at this poll because that was the number that surfaced in the Emerson poll. When we come back, I'll talk a little bit more about some polls and some other issues, and then we are privileged to have in studio at the top of the hour, Nick Adams. All that coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention while we were talking about the convention that we now know how some of the more liberal news outlets have not covered the convention. And that's not surprising, but it is pretty shocking when you look at some of the numbers. And that is, we have been hearing for some time, and if you turned over to CNN, but especially MSNBC, there were times when they would literally pull out of a speech and then go to somebody in studio or somebody on Zoom to give a counter perspective while the person was still speaking, which was pretty amazing to me. Well, our friends at the Media Research Center, they watch all of these things. They record it. They get stopwatches out and all that so that they can tell us how various things are covered in the news, how they're covered in entertainment, in this case, how they covered the convention. Let me just give you two comparisons here. CNN actually cut away from the Democratic convention all of 12 minutes during the 4 days. By contrast, CNN cut away from the Republican convention 78.5 minutes, or basically 6 times as often for CNN. And so that was the case. But the most dramatic one was MSNBC, because you had various individuals saying, we're not going to allow this dangerous information to go to our viewers. So MSNBC cut away from the Democratic convention 21 seconds. Essentially, it was just like C-SPAN. MSNBC cut away from the Republican convention 3 hours and 21 minutes. That is the most dramatic difference I think you could ever see. And again, if you're convinced that not just, and of course, this is not just cutting away, probably they did not, to be honest, cut away when you had the vice president speak or when you had the president speak. They're cutting away when you're having all sorts of other individuals that are speaking, whether it's Nikki Haley or Ben Carson, or whether it's Tim Scott. You know, you just go down the long list of individuals. 3 hours and 21 minutes compared to 21 seconds. I might use that in a future article on media bias because I think it illustrates it only so well. Well, I was talking about polls. There's another poll out here. It's the Trafalgar Group. It's always been the outlier, but it was an outlier last time that was right, because back in November, the Trafalgar Group poll actually had, interestingly enough, the Donald Trump leading, whereas every other poll had Hillary Clinton leading by 5 percentage points compared to Trump. And so that was certainly the case, especially when you were looking at, for example, the state of Michigan. That's where those numbers were for Michigan. On Election Day, Trump won Michigan by actually a fraction of a percent, but still won that state. And so the only poll that you could find then that was actually saying that Trump was going to win Michigan was this one. It also, interestingly enough, looked at Pennsylvania. And again, the polls, many cases, showed Clinton over Trump by 2 to 6 points, depending on which one you look at. Trafalgar had Trump ahead by 1 point, and again, he won by that about a fraction of a percent. So given that, given the past history, which is never necessarily a perfect predictor of future accomplishments, but nevertheless is interesting, what you have now is the Trafalgar poll showing Trump within a 0.5 percentage point of Biden in Minnesota, which most people didn't even consider a battleground state, and ahead by at least 1 point in Wisconsin and Michigan. And so we'll have to see where that takes us. But it is kind of intriguing to see that some of these individuals who in the past actually defied expectations and predicted a win by Donald Trump were actually pretty close to accurate. And this time making some predictions, which once again, we'll have to see how they play out. Polls mean a little bit in August and September. They mean a whole lot more in October. And of course, the most important poll happens on Election Day. Just before we take a break, this particular author writing in the Daily Wire used the phrase we've used so often: get woke, go broke. Now, the best example of that probably was Gillette producing all of these sort of commercials about toxic masculinity, in which it's lost its market share dramatically. As a matter of fact, we have Michael Knowles coming on. I think he's Thursday coming on, and we're going to talk about some very important tweets that he's put out. But also one of the things he does on his show is they will show one of these sort of woke ads, and then he's supposed to guess what the product is, and he's like 0 for 15, I think, or something like that, because these ads now trying to be so woke and so liberal, so progressive, they, if anything, cause people to go, I don't even know what your ad is all about. But more importantly, it sometimes just even turns me off. And we'll talk about some of those with him then. But anyway, this one, Get Woke, Go Broke, NBA. And that is the ratings for the NBA have dropped significantly as the professional sports league becomes increasingly woke. One report from City Journal, and we've had Heather McDonald on and others that write for City Journal, outlined the staggering ratings hit of the NBA because of its left-wing activism, most recently wearing social justice-themed warm-ups and jerseys, and even postponing playoff games over the police shooting of Jacob Blake. And, of course, there are all sorts of other reasons. It's hard to get real interested in what sometimes looks more like an all-star game where there isn't as much defense, and also looks like an exhibition game because there aren't real people in the stands. So there's a lot of things going on. But if I can quote from City Journal for just a minute, they said, quote, Americans have been falling progressively out of love with the NBA, for instance, and the pandemic has only exacerbated an already difficult situation. TV ratings, mediocre after the season restarted, are down collectively by 40% on the TNT network and 20% on ESPN since their peak nearly a decade ago. The report went on to say that the NBA's network TV premium broadcast ratings on ABC are off by 45%, which a former public relations executive for NBA describes as cratering of the viewership. And that is something that you have to pay attention to as well. Now, I admit there's a lot of things going on there. It doesn't look like basketball anymore because, to use an example we like to use here, when's the last time you saw LeBron James actually cited for traveling? Or Steph Curry for getting called for double dribbling, or James Harden for offensive fouls when he jumps into these individuals and then draws a foul from them. So this isn't exactly the basketball that we used to watch not so long ago, but there are some other issues as well. And one of those, of course, is the fact that the NBA has actually allowed them to wear various jerseys with social justice words. And so if the words are anti-racist, or say her name, or I can't breathe, or enough, or Black Lives Matter, or how many more, those are all good. All sorts of other things like all lives matter, and I can't wear that, and, support the police, can't wear that. So, again, it has become, if you will, an axiom. Get woke, go broke. And we're starting to see this with various companies. And we'll talk about that for a little bit with Michael Knowles because he's been following that even more so than I have. But we're starting to see it sometimes with things like the NBA. Anyway, let's take a break. And we are privileged to have in studio with us today Nick Adams. Been a while since we've had him here. My commentary today is called Digital Dementia. You know, while everybody's been talking about whether or not either or both of the presidential candidates have dementia, there's another kind, and it's called digital dementia, and it's something that affects not the elderly, it affects the young that spend entirely too much time in front of a screen, a computer screen, a cell phone, or whatever. And so I thought it would be good to talk about that again at a time when everybody's talking about dementia. I think the biggest concern is the dementia that is starting to affect young people, and you can read about that on the website. And we'll take a break and have more right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We have Nick Adams in studio with us today, and looking forward to that great conversation that will be taking place. Next hour, we'll have Carter Page with us for just a little bit, and we'll be talking about the Russian investigation and the 2020 election. Then we'll get back into the news. A number of articles that I've posted here about whether or not there's been a bounce after the Republican convention for Donald Trump, in particular with black voters. The comments just yesterday from the former Vice President, Joe Biden, about violence. Some people think it might be too little too late. And we'll come back to this idea of 94% of the COVID deaths had contributing causes, comorbidities. So there'll be a lot to cover over the next 2 hours. I hope you will stay with us. But let's, if we can, get to Nick Adams. I remember the first time we had him in studio, we really had to go through this long introduction because a lot of people did not know who he is. But he is a motivational speaker, Fox News commentator, business innovator, an individual that has worked with the Trump administration, a stage 4 cancer survivor. We'll talk about that as well. You may have seen his book, A Green Card Warrior, which was endorsed by the president. Kind of tells his story of coming here from Australia. And by the way, as he speaks, you'll figure out he is from Australia because, after all, he has his both undergraduate and postgraduate degrees from the University of Sydney. Also, one of the youngest, if not the youngest, deputy mayor in Australian history right there in Sydney. So it is great to have you in studio.
Kerby Anderson, it's always a pleasure. It's been too long. It's great to be back with you.
Now, again, I suspect some people now know you, and we've sort of had to introduce you to America before, but I still think before we get to your new book, which is, of course, Trump and Churchill, I think a lot of people are going to have fun with that one. The Green Card Warrior reminds us a little bit of why, as you describe even in this new book, I felt like I was an American in an Australian body. That's kind of how you described it, right?
Well, that's right. Kerby, I've had a very interesting life.
I'd say so.
Most people wait a long time for a life-changing moment. I didn't have to. At the age of 16 months, I was diagnosed with stage 4 neuroblastoma, a very rare form of childhood cancer. Mm-hmm. And my mum and dad were told that I had just a 5% chance of life, that 1 in 20 children with stage 4 neuroblastoma survive. And for 3.5 years, I underwent chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and an operation. And through the healing hands of God, our master physician, I defied the odds and lived. And it was actually the instincts of an American doctor, fresh out of college, just in Australia for a summer residency, that proved crucial to my survival. So I'm fond of saying that I haven't only studied American exceptionalism, I've lived it. Yes. In fact, I'm alive because of it. And once I became of an age, Kerby, where I could properly comprehend the magnitude of my escape, I resolved to never, ever waste a single second of a minute, of an hour, of a day, of a month, of a year, ever. And I very much lived up to that self-commitment. I did extraordinarily well at school. I became the youngest deputy mayor in Australian history. I was elected as a councilman at 19, the first election I ever voted in. I voted for myself. I'm now a 4-time best-selling author, the first author to ever have a book endorsed by a sitting president of the United States. I'm a presidential appointee, formerly in the Trump administration.
Right.
I've spoken in 42 of the 50 states. And so I've been very blessed to have gone on and had this incredible life. And I've always believed that God saved me as a little boy so that I could go on and do the work that I'm doing, which is inspiring Americans to realize just how good they have it in the United States, and making sure that every child in this country knows that the day that they were born in America, or the day that they moved permanently to America, is the day that they won the lottery of life.
Yes.
And that's why I set up this non-profit called FLAG,
Right.
Foundation for Liberty and American Greatness, which is all about teaching civics and promoting the American dream in K-12 education. So I've had a very rich life. I'm very lucky. I'm very blessed. And I fought hard to come here, as I outlined in Green Card Warrior. I really did. It was a struggle. I've got an extraordinary ability green card, which is, for your listeners, most Americans don't know what that is, and it's not very well known at all. But it's essentially, I liken it to being the greatest scholarship available on earth. It's the US government saying that you are so good at what you do on recognition alone. You don't need a job. We just want you to come and be one of us.
Yes.
And it took me 4.5 years to get my extraordinary ability green card. And since I've come here, I wake up every day and I thank God that I'm here, Kerby.
Yeah.
I really do. This is, despite all the problems that exist in America, this is still easily, by far and away, hands down, the greatest country in the history of the world. This is the best country to live in, to work in, to start a business in, to grow a business in, to realize a dream. And there are so many things that make this country unique. It still aspires to greatness and not mediocrity. You can colour outside of the lines, not be punished. Your first language or last name doesn't mean anything. Anybody can rise above any set of circumstances to go on and achieve whatever it is that they want to achieve. Failure is not fatal. You can fall down 5,000 times, but if you've got grit, determination, and hustle, you can get up 5,001. Thomas Edison had 1,000 cracks at the light bulb. Colonel Sanders had his recipe for fried chicken rejected 1,009 times before he got a taker. Walt Disney went bankrupt twice, almost 3 times. Same story with Henry Ford. Abraham Lincoln lost his first 12 elections on the trot. P.T. Barnum's first 2 circuses were abject failures, yet he went on to become the greatest showman. The theme throughout American history has been that those with resilience, those that refuse to yield, end up leaving a legacy well beyond their time on this earth. And that is such a special and remarkable and liberating thing that I want today's young Americans to know. I want them to realize that they're operating in a culture of success. They're operating in an environment where people are pulling for them and where the system is set up to stay out of their way to allow them to achieve what they want to achieve. That's why you've never heard of any other dream. You've only heard of the American dream. Mm-hmm. I'm the American dream, and I want every American to have that dream.
Yes. Well, and again, we saw a very different view of dreams in the Democratic National Convention, the Republican National Convention. And if nothing else, let me just, as we're coming to a break, since we have one of those mandatory breaks, mention that we have a link to your website. And some people might say, I want you to come and speak to my civic group or my church or my political group and give that story because you believe in American exceptionalism. And that seems to be kind of a rarity anymore. And obviously, you are a motivational speaker and can really get people motivated and understand, coming from the outside to look at our country, what a great country we really are blessed to live in.
Absolutely, Kerby. Yes. NickAdamsUSA.com. NickAdamsUSA.com is the website. I'd love to reach as many hearts and minds as I possibly can.
And again, we have some links there. We have an additional link. And when we come back, you will also see there's a link to a book called Trump and Churchill. Now, how in the two of those go together? 2 very different individuals. One who was short and drinking and smoking. Another who was 6'3" and never smokes, never drinks. So one that was involved in politics, one that was involved in business, and how in the world those come together. You'll pick up very quickly that Nick Adams, along with a lot of us, certainly has great respect for Winston Churchill. So you'll learn about Churchill, but you'll also maybe see some comparisons to Donald Trump. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, dementia is typically a disease that affects the elderly, but doctors are starting to talk about a new type of cognitive condition affecting younger individuals. They call it digital dementia. It results, they say, from the overuse of digital technology such as smartphones and computers. Brain function deteriorates because of digital overuse. Now, the left side of the brain is generally associated with rational thought, numbers, and facts. The right side is responsible for creative skills and emotional thought. If the right side is underdeveloped over a long period of time, dementia develops. The phenomenon of digital dementia was first noticed in South Korea. That should not be surprising, since that country has such a large population of internet users. It is also one of the most digital nations in the world, and a place where internet addiction was identified as far back as the late 1990s. They found that heavy users of digital technology are more likely to develop the left side of their brains. This leaves the right side untapped and underdeveloped. This affects attention and memory span, which could also lead to early onset of dementia in a percentage of cases. They also found that children were more at risk than adults because their brains actually were still developing. The Korean findings come after a study that was done at UCLA that found that young people were increasingly suffering from memory problems. A percentage of young men and women complained that their memory was poor. These initial studies are one more reason why parents need to monitor the digital world of their children. Digital dementia is just one of many reasons we need to protect children from the digital media storm. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Nick Adams. By the way, if you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. NickAdamsUSA.com. We also have flagusa.org. A lot of that's in the bio, but we also have some links there on the website, pointofview.net. Trump and Churchill. Right off the bat, you remind us of all the differences between these individuals, and there are many. I mean, you think about Winston Churchill, foreign minister, basically to this day, when we look at the Middle East, a lot of those lines drawn by an individual that served in war. Donald Trump looked like he was more of a draft dodger. Churchill, politically involved. Trump, not so much. So, and you talk about the difference between their height and their personality. Even talk about why his wife, Winston Churchill's wife, married him. They wanted to read history. She wanted to be around who was going to make history. So in some respects, as you point out early on in the book, they're about as different as night and day. But you also see some similarities.
Well, that's right, Kerby. You know, at first blush, when people hear Donald Trump and Winston Churchill in the same sentence, they might think,
what?
Really?
Yeah.
But I, very early on, I mean, I've been a supporter of the president from the very beginning. And as I watched him as a candidate and then the last 3.5 years as president, it began to dawn on me that despite the superficial, on the surface differences between Donald Trump and Winston Churchill, there actually was a remarkable amount in common. Mm-hmm. Both men loved their country. Both men endured battles with the political establishment, both proudly individualistic and unapologetic, both endured battles with the media, And one of the incredible things in Trump and Churchill is that we go and get articles, reproduce articles from the time period of the late 1930s, early 1940s, where the British newspapers were reporting about Winston Churchill. And if I didn't tell you that I was reading from British national newspapers about Winston Churchill, you would think I was quoting today or yesterday's New York Times or Washington Post. So identical are the criticisms, accusations that are leveled, that they're unserious, that they don't listen to anybody around them, that they're too optimistic. I mean, all of the things that are thrown at Donald Trump were thrown at Winston Churchill. And, both of these men, I think, were alpha males, and they had this incredible instinct. Now, the most amazing thing that I discovered in writing this book, Kerby, was that when I looked at both men's lives in their entirety, it felt like almost every single thing that had happened in each of their lives, both good and bad, made them absolutely perfect for the moment that they would find themselves in. And you look at all the failures even. I mean, Winston Churchill had this terrible failure in Gallipoli. And Donald Trump had businesses that didn't work, but all of those things I think made them ideal for the time that they came to office and the challenges that they faced in office.
I might just mention that in the 10 chapters, whether you agree with all the conclusions or not, these are qualities that you'd want to pass on to your children and grandchildren: patriotism, instinct, defiance, pugnacity, ebullience, and some of the others, a plotting kind of nature. And you're right, because both of them faced a time in which it seemed like the entire world was against them. There were people even in Winston Churchill's old party that just simply said, it is time to find some way to get a peace treaty with Adolf Hitler, and he is not ready to do that. And there are people in Donald Trump's party that says you should not be going after China right now. This just makes no sense at all. You need to try to bring some kind of peace. And yet this ability to sort of crowd out that noise, that background noise, and to have that kind of steely-eyed look to the future, I do see that in both of those individuals.
Without a doubt, Kerby. These are. All my life, I've always admired strong men, and Churchill and Donald Trump are very politically incorrect in that sense. I mean, today's male is not supposed to behave or have the instincts of a Winston Churchill or Donald Trump. It makes a lot of people feel very uncomfortable. But ultimately, these are the men that don't just read history, they make history or write history. And because they are so determined, and they are so bold, and they are so prepared to back themselves. And that level of clarity in their thinking really stands them out from everybody else.
One of the things that you attribute to both of them is the word genius. Now, I think even people that have been biographers of Churchill would have some difficulty with that. But if you see genius in the sense that they could see beyond the obstacles to the goal line, there was a sense in which he honestly understood that we can be victorious, even at a time when bombs are coming against us and the air raids in London and all of that. Or with Donald Trump, the idea that I can actually be elected, we can actually get a tax cut, we can actually build a wall. There is sort of a steely-eyed sense of being able to be prescient, which is another phrase that you use as well, and genius in this as well.
Yeah, look, the vision is certainly incredible. The vision is unbelievable from both men. They were able to... both men believed in the power of positive thinking, Kerby.
Right.
And they were able to... they are able to visualize something, conceptualize it, visualize it, and then go on and realize it and achieve it. And that's I think what's incredible. I mean, Churchill knew that he had to keep his people optimistic. He had to keep them fired up. He had to remind them of the glory days and promise them better days ahead. And in much of the same way, I mean, I happen to think that Donald Trump is at his best when he's optimistic and he's giving those commencement speeches and he's talking about dreaming and thinking big. And if you're going to think, you may as well think big. And I mean, I think that's really where he's at his absolute finest. And both men had that ability to be optimistic and be bold. And if you can have those two things, I think any leader is going to be one to be reckoned with.
Yes. Another one is instinct. That's one of the chapters. I forget. Oh, chapter 7. And there is a kind of a natural instinct. You can teach leadership, and I've been in classes where I've learned about leadership, tried to teach it, but there are some people that are just natural-born leaders. And I've never met Donald Trump, but I get the sense that when you walk into a room, he just sees things that other people don't see, and he has a sense of pulling things together in ways that other people get involved in all the minutia and everything. And there is a sense in which some of that is either you have it or you don't have it. It's either inbred, because you can't teach instinct, right?
Again, a very unpopular opinion, but I'm Kerby, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I do think that there is something inherent in those great leaders in history. There is an instinct there that they have, whether it's making a deal, whether it is knowing when to run, knowing when to attack, all of those things. And both of those men have that in spades. They have that instinct. You know, and you look at Donald Trump, I mean, his political instincts are just, I mean, they're second to none. They really are. I mean, he knows when to punch back, things that you and I think, well, you know, maybe he could have, you know, pulled his ammunition on that one. And then we realize, well, okay, by not pulling the ammunition on that one, he kept them diverted, or he kept them busy, and he was able to go ahead and do, I mean, all these. I mean, the great thing for me, Kerby, is when you look at it, and the great untold story of this election is that Islamic terrorism is not even mentioned.
That's true.
I mean, this president, I don't know if you remember, but during the Obama years, there was an attack every 5 minutes, it felt, in Paris, in Germany, I mean, everywhere. And all of a sudden, Donald Trump came in, and so quietly, I mean, he probably sat down with his advisors and said, right, guys, wipe these guys out. I don't want to know about them. Do what you got to do. And he did. Now we don't hear about it anymore. We hear nothing about that.
Yeah, we're not talking about Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, Qasem Soleimani, or anybody else.
None of those guys.
They got mentioned in the Republican convention as a footnote. That was it.
That's it. Yeah, exactly, Kerby. Yeah.
Well, let's take a break, and let's open up the phones. I certainly know we've talked about Donald Trump and Winston Churchill, and maybe you want to add some to the conversation, so I'd love to give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212 is the opportunity to talk with Nick Adams, and we're privileged that he's in studio with us today, and a Fox News commentator, an individual that is a presidential appointee to Donald Trump, and an individual that has written a number of books, including this most recent one, Trump and Churchill. And if you say, I'd like to read it, it's right there.
Pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
In studio with us today, Nick Adams. If you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Talking about his new book, Trump and Churchill. It is available both in hardback and Kindle. We have a link to that on a website. You can go to nickadamsusa.com. I think we have the wrong website up there, so we'll encourage you to go to nickadamsusa.com. Of course, you can also go to flagusa.org. And, of course, some of the other books that he's written, A Green Card Warrior, Retaking America. And it's just great to have you in studio with us today.
It's a real pleasure, Kerby. I love coming here, love speaking to you and your wonderful listeners all across the country.
Let's, if we can, talk a little bit more about the book, because I mentioned 10 chapters that you have right there, as well as a section on the speeches by Winston Churchill, the speeches by Donald Trump. So in some respects, this really covers quite a bit of real estate. And for those of us that grew up where we had Their Finest Hour and all sorts of other books on our bookshelf that have really benefited from learning about not only Winston Churchill, but about what it was like to be there in World War II. This is a way that you can get a little bit of a sense in that. And at the same time, you see all sorts of different parallels between these two individuals in history.
Without a doubt. So I selected what I believe to be Winston Churchill's finest speeches and Donald Trump's finest speeches. And we juxtaposed them, Kerby, so people could read about the different themes, see the different types of communication skills, and both men very different communicators, but both very effective and both very much in tune with the media environment of their time. And, Donald Trump's speech in Poland was one for the ages. It was incredible. It was remarkable. It was inspiring. And Churchill's, we will fight them on the beaches. We will fight them, both of these men reflect in their speeches and in what they communicated their own desire, their own passion, their own belief system. And that's really what I think people today yearn for. It's why Donald Trump was elected in 2016. He was elected because people want to believe in somebody. They want to believe in someone confident that has the courage of their convictions. And that's one of the things I think that has really been attacked in recent times when it comes to leaders and those trying to lead. You need somebody. You can't expect anybody to follow you if you're not confident yourself. And that's something that Donald Trump and Winston Churchill know instinctively. They knew that in order to be able to corral all the people around them, they had to be unshakable and they had to be unbelievably super confident. And look, like I say, for me, that's a fabulous quality.
Yes. Well, and one of the questions that maybe comes to mind is, to use an old biblical phrase, for such a time as this. Because sometimes in America, we have leaders that come at just the right opportunity to do a significant work in this country. Ronald Reagan comes in after these years of a misery index and Americans taken hostage and hyperinflation, and it's morning in America, and it's the optimism but also the desire to get the tax cuts and all sorts of things and turn America around in the 1980s. Another example is that you move 536 votes, and Al Gore would be the president in 2001 rather than George W. Bush.
Sure.
And yet I think George W. Bush was able to handle what was an attack on America and the terrorist attacks there. What about Donald Trump? I hope he doesn't go the way of Winston Churchill, that does a lot of good and then gets voted out of office. So what about this?
It's interesting because Kerby... Winston Churchill did lose the election immediately after the war, but then he was re-elected.
Yeah.
So, look, I don't think that's going to happen with Donald Trump. Look, I do think Donald Trump was the only man that could have won in 2016. That's the reality.
In hindsight, I think a lot of us saw that. At the time, everybody said, anybody but Donald Trump. I've had people sitting around this chair and these tables, and they're Ted Cruz supporters and things like that. But I think he was the only one that could. And frankly, when you talk about going up against China and going and pushing forward some of the things that he wanted to do and addressing immigration, he may have been, of all those 17 candidates, the only one that could have done that too. So that's why I'm sort of asking the question.
Yes.
When we look to the future, what does Donald Trump bring to this election that is going to be so contentious, obviously?
Kerby, I think that Donald Trump single-handedly, let me put it to you this way. I think that the American people granted themselves a massive reprieve in November of 2016. And they gave Western civilization a lifeline. Because I don't think it is an exaggeration or an embellishment to say that America was on the precipice. It still is. But America was on the precipice in 2016. It really was. I mean, if you want to imagine just for a fleeting moment what the United States of America would be like today after 3.5 years of Hillary Clinton, it would be an enormously different place. You wouldn't recognize it. And as bad as we think things are now, they would be even worse. So Donald Trump, sent by God to save America. I mean, it's difficult to not feel that way looking at it. I also think that this president now, not really, the stakes haven't changed. In fact, they've just gotten bigger. And Joe Biden would be a terrible president of the United States. It would embolden all of America's enemies. The American people would have a president that didn't really like their country, a vice president that certainly doesn't like the country. And I mean, and we saw when you have a president like the 44th president, he didn't really have much time for America either. Certainly not the America that you and I know and love. He might have loved other things about America, but he wanted to fundamentally transform the place. That was his words, not mine. What he wanted to do and what Joe Biden wants to do, Kerby, is transform America into something that it's never been, something that it isn't, and quite frankly, something that it should never be. And we're going to continue to lose our country and lose our freedoms and lose our values and lose all of the things important to us unless we realize the gravity of the situation that we're in. Now, Donald Trump has done unbelievable things for this country. Even just culturally, when you see the patriotism, the omnipresent flags, people are relaxed and comfortable again about being an American. We love the unapologetic nature. And that, I think, was the biggest difference between the RNC and the DNC conventions. The DNC was anodyne and bureaucratic and vanilla and pedestrian and grey and vanilla and dull. And the RNC was upbeat and optimistic and passionate and patriotic and filled with stories of courage and opportunity and possibility and greatness. But one was apologizing for America and the other was making no apology for America. I came, and again, much like the quality of confidence that I write about in Trump and Churchill and that we were talking about a moment ago with the two men, that same quality applies to a country. And I was attracted to the United States of America because it's the most self-confident country in the world. Always has been. It knows who it is. It doesn't really care what the rest of the world thinks. And it's going to go out and do what it thinks is right. Now, that to me is attractive. But sadly, we've got people now within America that want to change the place. And they want to turn it into the place, the types of places that I left, that so many others have left to come to America for. And Kerby, it's tough and it's rough.
Yes. Well, and one of the things that you saw as a striking difference that you already talked about in terms of patriotism was the steadfast unwillingness during the Democratic National Convention to talk about the turmoil in the streets, and the decision, of course, in the Republican National Convention to talk about that. And now we're starting to see all these polls and surveys that are saying, for a lot of Americans now, the economy or even moral issues aren't the number one issue. Security or safety is. Well, if the issue's law and order, doesn't that help Donald Trump?
It certainly does. He's the law and order president. He's not going to muck around, Kerby. He is the law and order guy. It's always been a big thing for him. And I think that's why we're starting to see everything trend his way. The president's not only going to win this election, Kerby, he's going to win big. It's going to be a landslide. Take it from me.
As a matter of fact, I want to take a break, and when we come back and talk about that, because if it's not a landslide, I got a feeling that Nick Adams has something to say about mail-in ballots and voter fraud and a few other things that we might get into. And as we pointed out before, even this weekend when we had on our Friday weekend edition, Kelly Shackelford, Dr. Merrill Matthews, and others say, I hope one side or the other wins big, because if it's close, oh, goodness, you can imagine. If you went through the election in 2000, that will be nothing compared to what this constitutional crisis could be like. So we'll talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes in studio with us today, Nick Adams. And one of the things I thought we might talk about is this election. You believe it will be a landslide. A lot of people right now look at some of the polls and say, well, Donald Trump in one poll is up by a few percentage points. Others, he's down by a few percentage points. But the momentum seems to be going in that direction. But if we have a close election, and we've had some close ones, I mean, after all, Donald Trump won, what is it, Wisconsin by 10,000 votes, Michigan by 27,000 votes. These are nothing. Or how about the 500 votes in Florida that put George W. Bush in office? So if this is close, we had 33 million mail-in ballots last time. Some people say we might have 80 million. And if you can't call the election on November 3rd night, I mean, this could go on for weeks and lawsuits and everything. So in some respects, I really hope that one side or the other wins, because we do not need a constitutional crisis right now.
No, we certainly don't, Kerby. And with the environment the way that it is right now in the United States, it would be devastating if we did get a result that would spark that kind of instability and unrest. Personally, as a patriot, I do hope that Donald Trump wins and wins big. As a political analyst, that's certainly where my judgment is. Of course, we never know until election day, but gauging by the level of enthusiasm. Now, I was in the United States in 2016 when he won, and there was a lot of enthusiasm then. I think there's even more enthusiasm now. So going by that, going by the president's record before the China virus hit, I think that, last time the people were voting for Donald Trump on speculation. what he would do, what he was saying that he would do. This time, they actually have something that they can take to the bank. And so I think that this president is going to win. He's going to win comfortably, and that'll be a great thing for the United States of America. What I can't wait for, Kerby, are the debates.
Well, and that was the next thing I was going to, and one of our callers wanted to talk about that, how he should handle the debate and race and all that. But a lot of it depends on whether or not Joe Biden really shows up, because you're seeing Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, saying, well, Donald Trump lies all the time. So they're trying to come up with all sorts of excuses why Joe needs to go back into the basement.
Yeah, of course they are. But look, I think that he will debate. I don't think he has much of a choice. And look, I don't know. The media's going to carry the water for him for sure. They're going to try and help him out as much as they can. But, this president we saw last time, not necessarily a Churchillian type debater, doesn't have the legal mind of a Ted Cruz or somebody like that. But he's aggressive. He's strong. He speaks very plainly. He is not afraid to blurt out the truth, and those are actually rather potent weapons.
Yeah, especially in a debate.
During a televised
Having done
debate.
debates over the years, sometimes that is the case. And again, for all the arguments that were given a year ago in fact, my commentary today is about digital dementia, but I use that because a lot of people have been talking about the supposed dementia of Donald Trump. He does seem to stay on point. When you follow Joe Biden, it is really hard sometimes to listen to him. And having had a father, having had a person that was in ministry with me with Alzheimer's, I'm not saying that Joe Biden has that, but there seem to be some similarities in just being able to connect the dots. Something doesn't seem quite right.
Look, and there are a lot of expressions that come to mind. Another rather flattering, but sandwich short of a picnic, paling short of a fence, not the full dollar. I mean, I could go on. I don't know what it is. I don't know. I suspect it's probably a combination of old age and
Sure.
I think he was always like that too.
Yeah.
I mean, he never was the most clear and coherent guy. And of course, with, at the age of almost 80, that's only going to get worse. But look, I think that's Joe Biden's, not his biggest problem. I think Joe Biden's biggest problem is the fact that he's been there for half a century and done nothing. And all of the things now that he says he's going to do, I mean, it's the easiest retort in the world. It's, well, okay, you've been in Washington for 50 years. Why haven't you done them?
Yes.
And there's really no answer to that at all. So I think that's why he's not a very good candidate. Not being articulate now is one of them. But just in general, I mean, never before, Kerby, have we had. It used to be that Democrats and Republicans had the same end goal.
Right.
Which was to make America a better place.
Yes. And they mean sometimes a disagreement.
Correct.
Yeah, sure.
The way to get there was what was in dispute.
Mm-hmm.
Now, both parties have got a totally different viewpoint of what America should be. There's no consensus on what it means to be an American. There's no consensus that America is a great country. I want somebody to ask Kamala Harris straight out and say, Senator Harris, do you agree with the statement that America is the greatest country in the history of the world? I would be very, very interested to hear her response.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a response I would suspect would make great campaign video for Trump 2020.
Michael Medved's been on the program with us before, and he oftentimes says the greatest country in God's green earth, and he always has people come up say, do you still believe that? And he said, well, do you have a next best, or do you have one that's better? And it always stumps people, because when you say that, people go, well, how could you possibly say that? And then when he puts them on the spot, they usually don't come up with an answer. Sometimes they'll come up with Sweden or Switzerland, something like that, but usually that's not the case. But we're just about out of time. We have finally the link to nickadamsusa.com pointofview.com, and there's an opportunity for people to get a copy of your book. You could even give them an autographed copy of your book. There's a place where they could book you and have you come and speak. So talk about what's available there.
Yes, Kerby. NickAdamsUSA.com. That's NickAdamsUSA.com. It's the only place where you can get signed, autographed, personalized copies of Trump and Churchill, Green Card Warrior, all of my books, Retaking America, Crushing Political Correctness. I am the president's favorite author. I'm the only author who he has endorsed 3 different books from.
That's
I think
true.
We're up now to 10 or 11 tweets about 3 different books over the course of 3 years. And so you can go on there and have a look. You can find out about FLAG as well and our resources. NickAdamsUSA.com. Would love to speak to your organization. Would love to speak to your group. Contact me, NickAdamsUSA.com.
And again, FLAG is flagusa.org.
FlagUSA.org.
So you can find that as well. And so we got all those resources there available. So I was speaking this weekend, and somebody said, well, who do you think is going to win the election? I think I know which way you're going to say. Who's going to win the presidential election?
Donald Trump.
Yes. What about the Senate? Any thoughts about that? You're probably out there right now stumping for some of these individuals.
Absolutely.
That's going to be important.
Yeah, Kerby, look, I think that... I think we're going to win all round. I mean, I just think that the hole that the Democrats have dug for themselves, I mean, by allowing these groups to grow and the criminal activity and the looting and the rioting and the protesting, that's come back to bite them in the backside. And as soon as you see them start to blame Donald Trump for that, you know they're getting desperate. And I think the greatest test of where the country is at are gun sales.
Yes.
And last month, it was a record month for gun sales.
That's so true. We did talk about that. Nick Adams, always great to have you in studio. Let's do this again sometime.
I'd love it. Thank you, Kerby.
Again, Trump and Churchill. Of course, you might also get Retaking America, Green Card Warrior, and many others, but we need to take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking briefly with Carter Page, and then we'll get into some of the statements made by the former Vice President, Joe Biden, when he was in Pennsylvania and other places. So we'll get into that, and we'll also talk about the pandemic and some other facts and figures that have come out from the CDC that we've mentioned before, but we'll come back and talk about again. All sorts of great information available at our website, pointofview.net, and I hope that you'll go there, follow the links, find the articles, and we'll come back and talk about some more very important topics right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking with Carter Page. And as you well know, we only occasionally dip into the Russian investigation when the Mueller report comes out. Of course, we're waiting for John Durham and some of the other reports that will come. But even with the guilty plea just the other day of Kevin Kleinsmith, it does give us a chance to maybe dip back into this. And Carter Page has a new book that has come out called Abuse and Power. We have a link to it on the website. No doubt you'll be able to find it in your local bookstore as well. And just to really maybe try to, first of all, as he wants to do in the book, set the record straight and recognize that there are still some really important unanswered questions. Maybe eventually we'll be able to get to the bottom of this. But will this Russian investigation have an impact on the 2020 election? The likelihood is it may indeed, depending on who brings it up. So let's, if we can, go to an opportunity to talk for a few minutes with Dr. Carter Page, founder and managing partner of the Global Energy Capital in New York, and an individual that graduated with distinction from the U.S. Naval Academy, was a Trident Scholar, has a Master's of Business Administration from New York University Stern School of Business, also an MA in National Security Studies from Georgetown University, and a doctorate from the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies. Carter Page, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Great to be with you, Kerby. Thanks for having me.
We don't cover this as much, so where if you were on maybe Sean Hannity's show, they hear about it every day, they'll know who Carter Page is. I dare say that some of my listeners might say, I kind of remember the name, but I don't remember how he got all tied up in this Russian investigation. Can you give us some background on that?
Yeah, it's a complicated story indeed, Kerby, and that's a part of the reason I'm writing this book. So essentially, there was a lot of false stories planted and paid for by the Democratic Party in the last presidential election cycle. And unfortunately, they were really pushing these false reports using a bunch of foreign spies and other illicit actors, both overseas and in the United States, to unfortunately illegally influence the 2016 election. And sort of one thing led to another with a ton of media reports, and eventually they were successful in convincing the Obama-Biden administration to file these spying warrants against myself as a way of spying on the Trump campaign. So it really was a very egregious election interference campaign, unfortunately. And, you know, over the last several years, over the last 4 years or so, a lot of steps initial steps have been taken to try to do some reforms. There's a big article, again, in today's Wall Street Journal, USA Today, AP, and a number of other news agencies talking about a new Department of Justice and FBI key steps to try to reform some of the terrible acts that were done as a way of damaging the Trump campaign back in the last presidential election cycle. So my book is just a description of this important historic events that created so much damage for our country, but also explaining some of the steps that can now be taken as we approach the next presidential election cycle to make sure that this never happens to any American again.
I might just mention it's published by Regnery, about 250 pages, and we have a link there so people get it in hardcover or Kindle. Again, they will probably be able to find it in the local bookstore. Abuse and Power, How an Innocent American Was Framed in an Attempted Coup Against the President. In some respects, you were kind of collateral damage. It was that they were trying to go through you to get to the president, ultimately go through you to get a FISA warrant. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was really, I mean, it was a massive endeavor tying in a lot of people, both in government and outside of government, both in the political sphere, in the Democrat Party, but also across a wide range of reporters in the media who were kind of pushing this false report. But again, I think you framed it exactly right, Kerby, where they weren't doing it just to damage me. It really was a serious election interference campaign to damage then-candidate Trump.
You know, a lot of people might say, well, gosh, we had the Mueller report, and that was enough. Of course, I mentioned John Durham's report, which we're still waiting for. In some respects, you're trying to set the record straight because some of that still isn't really clearly laid out in the Mueller report, is it?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And there are so many errors and omissions in the Mueller report. I don't know whether you and some of your viewers had a chance to watch it, but a couple of summers ago, after that long drama of the whole Mueller investigation, they ended up having Mr. Mueller testify in the House of Representatives.
It's kind of embarrassing. He didn't seem to even know what was in his own report. Is that fair?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it's quite sad, and unfortunately, and I get into this in chapter 6 of my book, really the first portrayal of what actually happens, what it's like to go through a day in the Mueller witch hunt dungeon in Washington, D.C. there. And so I get into a lot of those specifics. But unfortunately, and I think my experience there was representative of a lot of what other people were put through, which was 3 Democrat donors who were involved in this whole charade. They wore a lot of different hats. Again, they were they had these positions within the U.S. government on the one hand, but during the 2016 election, they were also donors. And in being donors, they directly or indirectly contributed to this whole election interference campaign against then-candidate Trump. So, I mean, it really was there's a lot of interesting pieces that all sort of fit together, and I think it helps explain the challenges our country has faced over the last several years as we've tried to emerge from that dark chapter in history.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Carter Page for just a little bit longer. The book is entitled Abuse and Power, but I thought maybe when we come back, you might talk about what it was like to actually go through this exhaustive and intimidating investigation through the Justice Department, because for anybody that's ever had very tough questions asked of them, and probably the worst any of our listeners probably have ever endured is an IRS audit, but this is a whole lot worse, what that meant. And then also, you are honest enough to talk about the impact that it has over you, because there is this cloud of suspicion that has hung over you for years and endured various years, literally, of government persecution under the guise of an investigation. So I thought we might spend another few minutes talking about that. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about this book, no doubt you can find it in your local bookstore. But as we've mentioned before, we have information about it on our website. Get it both in hardback and Kindle. And it is published by Regnery, about 250 pages. We'll continue our conversation with Carter Page right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, dementia is typically a disease that affects the elderly, but doctors are starting to talk about a new type of cognitive condition affecting younger individuals. They call it digital dementia. It results, they say, from the overuse of digital technology such as smartphones and computers. Brain function deteriorates because of digital overuse. Now, the left side of the brain is generally associated with rational thought, numbers, and facts. The right side is responsible for creative skills and emotional thought. If the right side is underdeveloped over a long period of time, dementia develops. The phenomenon of digital dementia was first noticed in South Korea. That should not be surprising, since that country has such a large population of internet users. It is also one of the most digital nations in the world, and a place where internet addiction was identified as far back as the late 1990s. They found that heavy users of digital technology are more likely to develop the left side of their brains. This leaves the right side untapped and underdeveloped. This affects attention and memory span, which could also lead to early onset of dementia in a percentage of cases. They also found that children were more at risk than adults because their brains actually were still developing. The Korean findings come after a study that was done at UCLA that found that young people were increasingly suffering from memory problems. A percentage of young men and women complained that their memory was poor. These initial studies are one more reason why parents need to monitor the digital world of their children. Digital dementia is just one of many reasons we need to protect children from the digital media storm. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue your conversation with Carter Page for a few more minutes. By the way, if you'd like to ask a question, 1-800-351-1212. Last half hour, we're going to have an open line, although we'll get into some of the things said yesterday by the former Vice President Joe Biden, some of the questions about the pandemic and some of the new information from the CDC and a number of others. But if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Talking about the book Abuse and Power. It just came out last week, how an innocent American was framed in an attempted coup against the president. And as we talk about this, Carter Page, one thing that crosses my mind when I look at what has happened to Michael Flynn, who we've had on the program years ago before all this controversy, and we've had George Papadopoulos on, we have you on. It reminds me of, since I'm the old guy around the table, when Raymond Donovan, who was the Secretary of Labor under Ronald Reagan, was accused of all sorts of things, having mob ties and everything. He finally one day asked the press, where do I go to get my good name back? Where do I go to get my integrity back, my reputation back? There is a sense in which some of you have been dragged through the mud, and I know that you want to set the record straight, but it also kind of gets us into, you know, there are people that have images about Carter Page or Michael Flynn or others that are simply crafted by the media stories, which we now know are false.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Kerby. And unfortunately, I mean, to me, there's a bigger, a variant of Raymond Donovan's quote, right? The question to me, as I think, you know, the example of General Flynn and others helps to illustrate, is where do we go to get our country back?
Yes.
I mean, there have been such terrible abuses to core institutions, not only in the justice system, but the U.S. intelligence community. And these are institutions that we really rely upon for our safety and for a just society. So to me, there's many more dimensions, and I'm hoping that, again, that's part of the objective of this book, is to help provide, the truth about what actually happened, number one, and number two, a pathway forward as to rebuilding so many of these critical institutions of our government, to help them rebuild in a way where they're respected again. Unfortunately, like I was just saying about the new statement and the new policies that have been put in place by the DOJ and FBI, there are so many things that continue, even though there are these piecemeal steps. There are so many things that need to be done to help restore the integrity of core American institutions.
Well, and that brings us to one of the obvious questions, and that is, during this election, do you want to drain the swamp or do you want to maintain the swamp? And so far, the kind of cleaning the house hasn't really taken place. And so I think that's something which, first in the Democratic National Convention and then the Republican National Convention, they both had this idea that this is on the ballot. The future of a country is on the ballot. Riots are on the ballot, all sorts of other things. I think the whole issue of whether or not we're going to actually have checks and balances that protect innocent citizens is really on the ballot too, don't you think?
I think you're absolutely right, Kerby. And unfortunately, our U.S. Constitution, the first 3 articles of it separate the powers into 3 different groups. And unfortunately, we've had abuses in all 3 of the core institutions. First, Congress, and unfortunately, Congress, some members of Congress acting illegally have added to this problem, and I get into some of that in my book in Chapter 5.
Yes.
But also DOJ and the FBI, which is Article 2, the executive branch of government, and as you're alluding to, with the court system as well. And I think the General Flynn case and what we saw again just yesterday with a really faulty decision and just the continuation of these challenges that he and his family are subjected to with little or no reason whatsoever, I think is really a national tragedy. So a lot of important steps need to be taken to start reestablishing our government and our way of life, because there are it really is now becoming a critical problem. And again, without correct information, without people understanding the truth, it's really a self-defeating process where there really remains no solution. So I'm hoping this book and this contribution can help provide an initial step in that positive direction.
Let's again talk about, you've sort of mentioned some of the chapters, but you talk about this kind of exhaustive and just really, I guess exhaustive is the best word, and intimidating investigation, then how your government was able to spy on you. And again, it reminds me of some of the conversations we had decades ago about whether a Patriot Act and a FISA court, which was supposed to be spying on what? People that were really dangerous, people that were part of a terrorist network, were spying on Americans. And one of the things, Carter, I've said before, is when we do talk about Michael Flynn, because we frankly talk more about him when we do get into these issues than we do about you, but I say if they can do this to Michael Flynn or to Carter Page, they can do it to you. If they can do it to an individual who is an innocent citizen, as you were, and a person with just an incredible record of service to this government, or they can do this to the national security advisor to Donald Trump, what chance do the American people have? So in some respects, that's the theme that really runs through the book. This happened to me, but if we don't change this, it could happen to anybody else reading this book. Fair?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Kerby. And unfortunately, in addition to him, General Flynn being the national security advisor, and I think this cuts to the core of the problem, and this is a common denominator between our 2 stories. Again, I'm a much smaller player, and he's a more central national figure. But unfortunately, as the former director of the Director of Military Intelligence, Defense Intelligence Agency, he really was on the inside of, the processes of the U.S. intelligence community. And unfortunately, they needed some serious reform. And I think a lot of what you see in each of our cases, again, him being much more senior, but, my case being able to sort of, with a lot more investigation surrounding it, I think there's a much more scope for understanding of how these systems of government actually work and these spying systems in our country. But he really tried to do some important, essential reforms, and unfortunately that only painted a larger target on his back amongst political actors in Washington, but also other members of the intelligence community. And unfortunately, there have been some major flaws and some major errors in the U.S. intelligence community's assessments over prior decades. And you mentioned the Patriot Act and some of the, the Iraq War and some of the things that had happened previously. Those often were driven by some intelligence mistakes. And this most recent episode, this historic juncture we've just been through, represents a time when there were just some, it really was brought to the next level, because not only were there major intelligence mistakes, but there were political actors embedded within our government and on the outskirts of our government in the Washington, inside the Washington Beltway, which really drove these terrible crimes against American institutions and against innocent American citizens as well. So, again, the stakes are exceptionally high, and I think particularly now as we approach the next election, it's really essential that people fully understand this extraordinary story in our nation's history.
Again, the book is entitled Abuse and Power, How an Innocent American Was Framed in an Attempted Coup Against the President, published by Regnery. You should be able to find it in your local bookstore. It is about 250 pages, and we have a link to it as well, so you can get it in hardcover or Kindle, but I think you'll be able to find it in your bookstore. And Carter Page, thank you for setting the record straight, and thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me on, Kerby. Great to speak with you.
Let's, if we can, take a break, and when we come back, I'll cover a couple of issues. First of all, I mentioned it yesterday, but some people said I didn't mention it strong enough, so we'll get to it again. That is the new CDC report, and we've got an article that relates to this on the website, showing that 94% of the COVID deaths had contributing causes, what we call comorbidities, so we'll get into that. Or put another way, it means only 6% died just from COVID-19. And what's the implication of some of that? So we'll get into that in just a minute. We, of course, have the former vice president, I should say, Joe Biden, speak yesterday, in which he was making the case that we should speak out against the violence, but there's been a long period of time in which he has not, so we'll get into those issues. And also I've posted a couple of polls that tell us where we are going after the first Republican convention, and even before that, the Democratic National Convention. We'll be back right after this.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention that the last article I've posted on the website, I'm going to start with, simply because yesterday I did mention this, but I had some people off air calling in and saying, why aren't you talking more about that? And okay, we mentioned it, but maybe we need to highlight it. So here I am highlighting it. It's an article that says 94% of COVID deaths had contributing causes, according to the new CDC report. Now, the report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention actually goes into this in some detail. The article that I've posted is one that you can read, and it is written by Brandon Morris, in which he points out that when you look at the table, and this one doesn't have the number on the table, I believe it was table 4, on this report, you will see something really striking, and that is that 94% of the deaths that had coronavirus listed as the cause actually had something else that actually brought the death about. Now, that's how Brandon Morris puts it. What I would say is, no, they too might have worked together. In other words, if, for example, we'll look at the table right now, that they also list influenza and pneumonia, well, it's quite possible that COVID-19 caused the pneumonia, and between the pneumonia and COVID-19, you died of it, or adult respiratory distress syndrome, or respiratory failure, or down in the circulatory ones, the issue of cardiac arrest or cardiac arrhythmia, heart failure. They might have worked together synergistically, if I can use that term. But the point that is being made there, so I don't want to make it quite as strong as this particular article, but the point that's being made is really only 6% of the individuals who died just of COVID-19. Now, again, we recognize some of those facts and figures could be off. Maybe they didn't recognize or diagnose something else. But the point that is being made is that many of these people, the disproportionately large number of those people died, were because of what are called comorbidities. These can be things like hypertension, heart failure, or circulatory diseases of some sort. Then it has a whole category there called other factors related to, and the other factors could be Alzheimer's, diabetes, obesity, intentional, unintentional injury, poisoning, whatever. And then it goes through the fact that it even documents where these people actually died. A very significant number, as you might imagine, were in a healthcare setting like a hospital, but a very significant number of them also died in nursing homes. And if you look at those numbers, you recognize that those account for a very significant number of the deaths. And as if you were listening even Friday when we had Dr. Merrill Matthews on with us and Kelly Shackelford, Dr. Matthews has pointed out before that there was a regulation in the state of New York that said you cannot discriminate against somebody who may have been diagnosed with COVID-19 by putting those people who were easily spreaders of the disease into nursing homes, is why you've got such a disproportionate number of deaths in these nursing homes. So nevertheless, I wanted to feature it one more time. It is something that's getting a lot of press. You can read this article, which is on the website, pointofview.net, or of course you can probably find quite a number of those out in other venues as well. But simply take advantage of that and print it out and read a little bit more about that. And of course, it also provides you a link. You follow the HTML link, it will take you to the report, and you can read it for yourself. And as we say so often, don't trust what I'm saying, don't believe what I'm saying, read it for yourself so that you will come to the similar conclusions, I suspect. Okay, yesterday was a desire on the part of the Biden Harris campaign to get out of the basement and to go on to a number of places to begin to address issues. And one of those addresses was this issue of why aren't we hearing more about this particular issue of the turmoil in some of this various states. And so that was something that yesterday you had a presentation being given, really about a 12-minute speech by former Vice President Joe Biden. And as one article which I've posted here says, after 3 months of violence, vandalism, and arson in our biggest cities, finally you have a speech that was given by the president, vice president. He posted, I might just mention on Sunday night, something on the campaign site, but nevertheless, as this particular article that I've also posted on the website points out, there was maybe too little too late in that regard. But again, probably the famous line there from the speech yesterday by Joe Biden was, you know me, you know my heart, you know my story, my family story. Ask me and ask yourself, do I look like a radical socialist with a soft spot for rioters? Really, I want a safe America, safe from COVID, safe from crime and looting, safe from racially motivated violence, safe from bad cops. Let me be clear, safe from 4 more years of Donald Trump. And so, of course, the attempt to say I am going to speak out on the subject of the vandalism and the riots that have taken place. Now, the reality is the last time the president, I keep calling the president, last time the former vice president spoke to this issue was June 1st. If you look at the calendar today, you see it's September 1st. So there's been almost a 3-month hiatus before an attempt to address that, something that was not addressed at all during the 4 nights of the Democratic National Campaign. And some people might say, well, he spoke about it in June, so there's really no reason for him to bring it up on a regular basis. My argument, and this is why I posted this article for you to read, goes back and says, well, there's some very prominent Democrats who are saying some things that seem to be contradicting that, and that's why you would think it would be important for the standard bearer of the Democratic Party, the former vice president, to say something about it. One of the quotes that we have in this article we've posted comes from the Democratic representative from Massachusetts, Ayanna Pressley, who in an interview that she did with MSNBC, and this has been shown, this clip's been shown many times before, talked about that if we're going to make a difference, there needs to be unrest in the streets. In other words, if we're going to get any kind of fundamental transformation of this country, we need more unrest in the streets. Okay, that would be something you would think that former Vice President Joe Biden would want to counteract. Some of you might say, well, I don't really know her. She's a representative from Massachusetts, but I think most of you would know the Speaker of the House. That would be Nancy Pelosi, who a while back actually said and questioned why there weren't uprisings all over the country over Trump's policies. And of course, even yesterday, when Joe Biden made this statement about, do I look like a radical socialist? Well, no, you don't really look like a radical socialist. Are there socialist ideas in your platform and in the Biden-Bernie Sanders agreement? Yes, there are. But nevertheless, the implication he made later on is that if you reelect Donald Trump, there's going to be more of this violence. So you know that the president decided he was going to respond to that in one way, in which he said, quote, Biden is making mafia talking points. The mob will leave you alone if you give them what they want. The mob will leave you alone, but it does not work that way. Once you give in to them, they keep taking. What happens is you give, and they no longer respect you. And so, again, there's been the counterpoint, because you might remember that the president, Donald Trump, actually summed up his speech on Thursday night, basically by saying, quote, they will make every city look like Democrat-run Portland, Oregon. No one will be safe in Biden's America. So what we've got right now is kind of a back and forth in which Donald Trump is saying that if you elect Joe Biden, no one will be safe in Biden's America. And you have Joe Biden yesterday basically saying if you reelect Donald Trump, then we're going to have more of these riots. So it, I think, illustrates the controversy that we're going to see over the next couple of months during the campaign. But it is a good illustration of the fact that up until now, we have not heard a lot of statements about the various violent confrontations, and there is pretty good evidence to suggest, as even illustrated by some of the back and forth on CNN, about the fact that now we are starting to see more and more of the polling, more and more of the focus groups beginning to surface that one of the biggest issues in Campaign 2020 is the issue of safety and security. Almost always one of the top issues is the economy. How are you doing? Are you making enough money? Do you have a job? Are you looking for a new job? And that is number 2 on the list. But what seems to be number 1 on the list right now is this issue of safety and security. Later this week, I have a commentary coming out on the 3 different ways in which that word security has surfaced in some of the polls. But it, I think, is illustrative of why, up until now, the Biden campaign thought they might be able to run most of the campaign from the basement. Now he's out there on the campaign field and probably will also show up at some of these debates. We'll come back, though, and talk about what do the polls suggest was the impact of these conventions. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. One of the other articles I've posted here actually looks at what is called the Emerson poll. This is produced and conducted by Emerson College, about 1,500 voters. Again, I'll issue the disclaimer I always do. The only poll that really matters happens on November 3rd, but some of these polling outfits do a better job than others of being able to identify likely voters and giving you a little bit of a trend. And what they basically wanted to try to do in this poll is determine was there a bounce, if you will, between the Democratic National Convention and the Republican Convention, because oftentimes there is. There doesn't seem to be much of a bounce from the Democratic National Convention. There does seem to be one from the Republican Convention. They conclude there that the vice president, former vice president, is up by about 2 percentage points over Donald Trump, which is a very significant gain for Donald Trump. I mentioned yesterday a poll that has Donald Trump up by 3 percentage points, but again, some of those within the margin of error, and of course, they don't mean a whole lot in August, but nevertheless gives you something there. But the one reason I posted this is, they say in this particular article, one of the most surprising results from the poll was the president's increase among black voters. Now, yesterday, if you listen to the program, we did an interview with Gerard Robinson and an interview with Harry Jackson in the second hour, and talked about the importance of the black vote. But also, it was kind of intriguing to see how much of an increase there was. If you remember back when we had Robert Woodson on the program, of the Woodson Center, he predicted that there would maybe even be a doubling of the percentage of the number of people that would vote for Donald Trump. And so if you look at this, you can see that their poll says that Biden has support of about 77% among the black voters, whereas Donald Trump has 19%. Now, to put that in perspective, back when you had, of course, President Barack Obama, he routinely got about 93% of the African-American vote. Hillary Clinton dropped down to about 88% of the African-American vote. And this says that Biden has only maybe 77% of the African-American vote. By contrast, when Donald Trump ran against Hillary Clinton, he really only got about 8% of the black vote. This one shows 19%, which is very close to the kind of prediction made by Robert Woodson when he was on the program with us not so long ago, because those votes in many cases are taking place in the so-called battleground states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Now, if you want to go into that in some more detail, there is a poll that most people ignore. It's called the Trafalgar Group poll. And the reason is it's almost always an outlier. And it was in 2016. While most of the country was predicting that Hillary Clinton, for example, in Michigan, was ahead by 5 percentage points, the Trafalgar Group predicted that Trump was really ahead by about 2 percentage points. And, of course, Trump won Michigan. In Pennsylvania, the same thing. Most of the other polls showed Hillary Clinton leading Donald Trump by anywhere from 2 to 6 points in the run-up to the election, whereas the Trafalgar poll had Trump ahead by 1 point, and again, he won Pennsylvania. So you can see that sometimes they and their polling have been an outlier. But you can also see that not that past prediction is any guarantee of future performance, but so far in 2016, they were pretty accurate. And once again, as you might imagine, that particular poll is completely out of step with the rest of the polls, because it released a poll saying that not only is Donald Trump ahead in Wisconsin and Michigan, but he's also ahead in Minnesota, which most people didn't even put in as a battleground state. So, of course, you can think about Minnesota, Wisconsin, some of these right now affected by some of these riots, and it just gets you into what could be taking place in the future. Now, does that mean that's going to take place? Is that a certain? I don't think so, but it's a good illustration of that. And by the way, just before we take a break, I thought I would mention this coming from our friends at the Media Research Center. Because how have the various networks covered the conventions? And they, in particular, found two rather dramatic differences in the way CNN and MSNBC covered the conventions. And if you wanted to have a good piece of evidence for media bias, this might be one of those. There are others that you can use as well. As a matter of fact, we have an upcoming Outlook issue on media bias. But if you look at CNN, during the Democratic National Convention, August 17th to the 20th, they only interrupted the speakers at the Democratic Convention 12 minutes. Not a whole lot over 4 days. By contrast, in the Republican convention, which took place August 24th to 27th, they interrupted speakers 78 minutes, 6 times more likely. But the real, very significant, and I think even surprising to me, difference was with MSNBC. During the Democratic convention, August 17 to 20, MSNBC interrupted the speakers at the Democratic convention 21 seconds. 21 seconds. Almost basically like watching it on C-SPAN. By contrast, MSNBC during the Republican convention, August 24 to 27, interrupted it 3 hours and 21 minutes. And if you don't see the difference between 21 seconds and 3 hours and 21 minutes, you can see the problem. Now, again, when you recognize that neither of these or any of the others are going to interrupt the vice president speaking on Thursday or the president Wednesday or the president speaking on Thursday, you can see that this really is talking about the other speakers. And so during the Republican convention, even though you're hearing from Senator Tim Scott, you're hearing from Nikki Haley, you're hearing from Dr. Ben Carson, Secretary of HUD, and all sorts of other individuals, and you have some incredible stories of individuals that are speaking to this issue, like Alice Johnson and Abby Johnson and all sorts of other individuals. The MSNBC anchors decided to interrupt that 3 hours and 21 minutes, and oftentimes in the midst of the speech would just cut away to then have somebody else counter-program to some of the things that were said. So again, I encourage you to watch any or all of the different networks and read widely, but the striking difference on MSNBC between only interrupting 21 seconds of the speeches in the Democratic Convention and interrupting 3 hours and 21 minutes during the Republican convention maybe tells you all that you need to know. Well, if you want to find some of these articles, because we've been talking about everything from COVID deaths and the statement by the former vice president on violence, as well as some of the Trump bounce and those kinds of things, all available at the website pointofview.net. My Viewpoints commentary today is about digital dementia. You know, we've been hearing people talk about dementia on the part of either or both of the presidential candidates, and we can have that conversation for another day. But I point out in this that I've written about before that if there's any example of dementia, it's what's called digital dementia that is affecting young people that are spending entirely too much time in front of a computer screen, in front of their cell phones. And at a time when we've had the pandemic and the lockdown, maybe it's time to reevaluate some of that. So we wanted to post that article for you today to find on the website at pointofview.net. Well, that's all we have for the day, but I'm looking forward to a very significant number of great interviews over the rest of the week. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.